It is time to begin seeking excellence.
Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Nathan Crankfield, and this is my conversion story. I've thought about sharing this again for a long time because I haven't done a full episode on my conversion story for 3 years, I think, since I really started podcasting. I think it was like my first or second episode ever was my conversion story. And so I've been blessed to share this story many times in many different situations, audiences, one-on-one, large groups. And it's interesting how your conversion story, I think, can to you become so normal that you kind of forget the power and the beauty behind it. And so I'm excited to go back through it today. I'm excited because this is a good little warm up for me. I'm sharing it at RCIA soon, where me and my wife Emily are table leaders. We're volunteers at our RCIA at our parish. And I know that stories are so powerful for people. Hearing someone else's story, their testimony, their journey with the Lord can be incredibly moving. It can be encouraging, inspiring. And so I want to share mine again, and I want to share it more deeply. I want to go deeper into it. And I have no idea how long this is going to take me. Sometimes I feel like this could be a 5-minute story, a 10-minute story, or there could be a 2-hour version of this. And so I'm just going to share. I have no notes. I haven't gone through an outline. It's my life. So hopefully I'll be able to just kind of tell the story. I think it's always something that's funny when people talk about sharing their testimony, or they share, talk about sharing their, just sharing your story. It's funny how we write notes and we plan it out. And I'm like, this is my life, right? I should be able to know. And hopefully I reflect enough on my life to have an idea of what my story is, what happened along the way, how God inserted himself and started to pursue me, and how I ended up becoming Catholic. So to start from the beginning, this is an intro that I share very often in talks. But I was born and raised in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Born in Harrisburg, July 17th, 1993. My mother was a Lutheran, and so she had been raised Lutheran. And my dad was pretty much not Christian. I used to say that he was a kind of non-practicing Southern Baptist. And my grandmother, his mother, was definitely Southern Baptist, but for most of my life, my dad told me that he was not a Christian. And he had his own kind of theology and beliefs that he believed, and his reasoning for saying that. I know that he always believed in God. I think he always believed that Jesus was the Son of God. But never really shared with me any type of like theology beliefs other than the fact that he believed he wasn't a Christian. Now, I think there was some pretty flawed theology there in his understanding of what it means to be a Christian, because I think that he thought that he had to achieve some type of level of perfection or virtue before he would be able to state that he was a Christian. And as I'll get into more of this story, there is something to that makes sense to me, because if you're going to live in a way that is intentionally contrary to Christianity, I think there is some value to not going around telling people that you're a Christian. And so the more I think about that and reflect on that, it is a little bit more sound than I previously thought, but there was always an objection in my mind of saying, well, you are a Christian if you believe in Christ. But I think there is something profound about not wanting to say you're a Christian before you're at least trying to live the Christian lifestyle. Because I think that it does do great damage in the world when we have people who claim to be Christian or Catholics that are just very freely and intentionally not living Christian lifestyles. And so then you have out in the world people who call us hypocrites, people who, criticize the way Christians behave, the way they act, the way they don't live out the teachings of Christ, of Jesus himself. And that, I think, is a tragedy. I think it's really sad to see that when that happens. So that was kind of where my dad was. Now, they got pregnant with me while dating and then eloped. And so they got pregnant with me about 3 months later in January of 93. They eloped in the Poconos, which is the mountains up in Pennsylvania. And so they eloped and got married. My dad at the time had already had 6 kids by 4 different mothers. So I became the 7th child. My mom became the 5th mother of my dad's children. And so that was a very interesting kind of family background as well. And so I had that experience, and my older siblings were Yeah, all very different. They're all very different people, even to this day, very different. Yeah, my oldest brother, Corey, ended up going to prison. He was sentenced to prison, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later when we get to that. My oldest sister, Nicole, not really practicing the faith, and many of my family members would describe themselves as people who believe in God, but there isn't really any type of Christianity or any theology there, right? There's no understanding of what that means and the implications of the existence of God in our actual lives, which is interesting. And then my mom's side was generally church going. Not all of them went to church regularly. I don't remember as much when I was like before I was 10 or even in my high school years. I know that I have some family members on that side that go to church very regularly, and many on that side who do not. So it's kind of a mix. So I'm born right in Harrisburg, PA. We lived in a little townhouse that was bordered on a farm back then. Harrisburg hadn't expanded out as much as it did now, so we still live pretty close to the city, but we were neighbor to some cows. This is something I specifically remember. We lived in the house until I was about 2 or 3. Then we moved into the house that I lived in for the rest of my childhood. If you're from Pennsylvania, I lived at like 72nd and Dairy Street in Rutherford, PA, to be more specific. If you don't know as much about Pennsylvania, I was in between Harrisburg and Hershey. Hershey, Pennsylvania, the sweetest place on earth. I have a strong bias towards Hershey's chocolates because of this. I hate hearing any Hershey slander. That's not something I stand for in my life. And so that's something I'm very passionate about as well. So I think, I want to say it was 3 months later, because I'm pretty sure my baptism day's in October. My mom and dad had me baptized in a Lutheran church, in Messiah Lutheran Church there in downtown Harrisburg. So I was baptized Lutheran, and then my mom was a probation officer. My dad was a truck driver. And in the early few years of my life, I think until I was about 2 or 3, my dad was like a long trip truck driver. So he was driving out to Texas, Colorado, really getting out there, and he'd be gone for, upwards of weeks at a time. And my mom was, I think at this time in my life, working in work release. So she was a probation officer, work release. She worked basically in probation and parole for Dauphin County, where I grew up, for my entire life. And so, my mom was kind of, for weeks at a time, kind of single parent. And then my dad would come home, and my dad was, you know, really kind of weighed down, I would say, financially to a certain degree because of child support from the other kids. So even though I think my parents made a pretty good living, things were always kind of financially tight. We were never poor by any means. We never like wanted for anything, any need especially. But things were, I think, just stressful, financially stressful in our house is the way that I would describe it. And I know that's something that a lot of people can relate to. But growing up, until I was about 10 years old, the way I remember it is that until I was about 10 years old, I had a pretty fantastic childhood. I had very loving grandparents on my mom's side, and I spent a lot of time at their house. They had a pool, so I'd stay with them pretty much the entire summer. I lived there. I would basically go there on the summers from Monday through Friday, more or less. And so then I would come home for the weekends with my parents. And so, we'd go to the beach a week each summer. We, had a great time, wrestled with my dad, loved being around my family, and just generally enjoyed my life. I went to a Methodist preschool from, when I was a few months old until I was in kindergarten age when I was 5. And then my mom, by the grace of God, started me in Catholic school. So I went to Catholic school from, starting in kindergarten, so age 5 up until college, up and through college, I should say. Went to Catholic college as well. And so my mom starting me there in Catholic school was really pivotal and was huge, obviously, for my conversion. So I'm, going to Catholic school. Life is pretty good until I'm about 10. And I don't know, I've never asked my parents really what the shift was when I was around 10. I have my assumptions, but around 10 years old is when my parents' relationship, from my memory, started to get very rocky. And so around age 10, this is also when I was exposed to a lot of, I would say, like adult things, right? So I just encountered a lot more adult things in my life at this point. What I mean by that is things like I started watching Chappelle Show, Comedy Central became a part of my life. I remember seeing like 8 Mile, I'm pretty sure came out that year. This is when I was introduced to like explicit rap music. So the Eminem Show, Get Rich or Die Trying, watching South Park with my friends. playing Grand Theft Auto that was coming out. And so to me, it just seemed like in this year of my life around age 10, the guardrails really came off. And so I was kind of like, living this pretty, as much as my mom could, innocent life as a child. With my dad's family especially, was still listening to a lot of rap music, kind of exposed to a lot of explicit rap music before this, but nothing too crazy. And I was going to Catholic school, so things were generally kind of under control. And then at 10, it seemed like that was when things kind of really blew up. Simultaneously, as I mentioned, my parents' marriage is kind of waning and going through some tough times, and all the way up until, or including my dad being kind of in and out of my life again. And so by the time I was about 2 or 3, as I said, my dad had stopped doing the long distance trucking, and he was still a truck driver, but he was doing more day trips. So he'd go to like Connecticut, New Jersey, kind of the surrounding states, right? Staying on the East Coast. And around when I was 10 years old, he started to be more absent from my life. He would go and live with, my brother's family, or I don't know where he would be at times. And this would be anywhere from like a week to up to 6 months at a time. My dad would just be gone. Occasionally we might talk on the phone. He would blame it on issues that he and my mom were having, but really pivotal time of my life, from about 10 to 14, this happened from my memory. And, very developmental. I remember having, one of my core memories being a kid on, I can't remember what holiday it was. It was Thanksgiving or Easter, if I'm not mistaken. And my dad got in a fight either with me or with my mom and was leaving. And I just remember having this moment where I told him at our door, I can still like vividly remember this, just a core memory of my life, where I said, "You're not a man. You're not a man because you're running from your responsibilities. You're leaving your family." And it's interesting that with no formation really on masculinity or manhood up to this point in my life, I still had this understanding and this deep, this deep understanding and just kind of hunch or idea that being a man meant that you man your post, right? You don't leave your responsibilities behind. You don't leave just because things get difficult. You have to stick it out. You have to do what you're called to do and handle your business, right? And so even at 10 years old, I kind of had this idea. And there was something in me, I think, around this time, right? 10, 11, 12, 13, when we were going through some very difficult times, whether my dad was gone, my parents are fighting a ton, the financial stress was really mounting and getting more difficult. At the same time, I'm getting exposed, as I said, to all these adult type things. Your body's going through changes. You're going through puberty. I'm starting to act out more in school, and up until 5th grade, I was kind of rowdy, mostly just talked too much in class. But come 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, this is where I really started to kind of push back against authority, and not having a father, fully present in the home, made it difficult. Even when my dad was around, because he was a truck driver, he typically woke up somewhere between 1 to 3 a.m. and would come home between 3 to 5. So he was working anywhere from 12 to 16 hours a day, usually 6 days a week. So he would be gone. He would do it on Saturday as well. Sunday was really his only day off each week. So even when he was around, he wasn't super present. Even when he was present, he wasn't necessarily the best role model, right? It didn't really encourage me or form me to what it meant to be a man, what it meant to be a good man, certainly not what it meant to be a Christian. And so I'm taking all these things in from Chappelle's Show and South Park and Grand Theft Auto and rap music. And this is really starting to formulate what I think it means to be a man. And I'm getting to this tough area of my life, come upon my 12-year-old year was the hardest year of my childhood. When I was 12, my parents were on and off. Up until the point I was 12, I mentioned earlier that I mentioned earlier that I have 6 half siblings, all on my dad's side. I'm my mom's only child, and that I'm the 7th. Up until I was 12, I thought there was only 5 of us. And so my parents had told me that I had 4 siblings, 2 sisters and 2 brothers. And come to find out this year, I discover, I remember one was during a fight with my parents. They just were yelling so loud and just kind of, one of them let it slip, that I had another half brother out there. And this is who my dad had been spending time with his family. That was kind of rocking 2 families at this point. And then 6 months or so later, I found out that I had another brother. So you can imagine the trust issues that created in me at 12 years old. Already had them with my dad, but finding out from my memory that my mom knew about one of them was really devastating to me at that time. I was already struggling with authority, but you can see how this, when you're a kid, having trust in your parents, having trust that they're looking out for what's best for you, and then not even being able to trust them to tell you the size of your family, really cut to the core and really severed a lot of my, you know, I mean, looking up to your parents, right, is really big as a child. You want to have parents who are role models. You want to look to your parents as your heroes. And so that really had an impact on that, but it also just had an impact on my faith in the adults in my life, right? I had to question who all knew, right? Did all of my siblings not know this? Did my grandparents know it? I didn't know who to trust and what to believe at this point. In that same year, in the midst of all of this, my nephew, and I have multiple, I mean, maybe like 8 to 10 nieces and nephews that are older than me. I probably have 20 plus. I counted recently. I think I have like 24 nieces and nephews total, including grand nieces and nephews. I'm a great uncle at the ripe age of 30 to some 5 or 6 kids. More than that, depending on if you count step kids. And I'm going through all of this kind of struggle, right? Because my nephew is one of my best friends, probably my best friend at this point in my life, my nephew Christian. And I remember watching him get into a fist fight with my sister Nicole, and they're like attacking each other. Then eventually they were down in the basement, and I didn't know what to do. I was frozen because my sister Nicole was really like my closest aunt. You know, she was so much older than me. She wasn't crazy older than me, but 18, 20 years older than me. And I remember she was like my closest sibling, and he was my closest friend, and here they are fighting each other. And I just didn't know what to do, and I just froze. And I was just like, I knew that he had a lot of issues with her. My nephew Christian, God bless him, had never met his father, to my knowledge. And so that was a really powerful moment just to see that. And just, I had so many complex feelings from that. And my sister instructed me to call 911. I remember this was my first time seeing the police called in the inner city, and they didn't come for like 2 hours or something like that. And by that point, my nephew Christian had already ran away. We decided after that, my parents and my mom specifically, Christian lived with us for like 6 months, and he and I just basically shared a bedroom upstairs, and my mom would take us both, or maybe that was later in high school. I can't even remember. There was a point though where he lived with us for a while in our 2-bedroom townhouse, and it was tight. He basically just slept on my bedroom floor, and that was life. But I remember that being a very powerful moment for me. You think about the distrust with the sibling stuff with my parents. Here's my sister, who's my closest sibling and my best friend, and they're fighting each other, and I don't know whose side to take, right? Because neither of them were very loving to the other. And then this same year, my brother Corey, my oldest brother, got sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for a very terrible, violent crime. And so he was one of my role models up to that point in my life, because he's your oldest brother. If you have an adult brother and you're a kid, you're going to look up to them as a role model, right? It's just a natural thing. And he was a very terrible influence. I mean, his house was just kind of the free-for-all house, and we would sleep over there, me, Christian, my other nephew, Daniel, and we would stay there at his house, and he had dirt bikes, and would let you curse. Kids were allowed to curse at his house. We could watch whatever we wanted. I remember this is the first place I'd ever seen pornography, was at his house when I was young, somewhere around 11 or 12. And it was just crazy. I mean, it was just absolute madness. It was just a free for all, kids raising themselves essentially. And he got sentenced to prison. So there goes like any semblance of a role model that I had up to this point in my life was kind of just destroyed. And somehow, by the absolute grace of God, I turned to the church. I turned to Catholicism to be kind of my place of solace for this. So the only time that I felt like, in these years of my life that I was experiencing any peace was when I was at school mass. I would go to mass, and at this point in my life, we're a couple years from going to church at all, to our Lutheran church. I think when I was young, my mom made an effort to go, and then she always had to work multiple jobs. So this led to me being alone a lot on the weekends as well, because as I mentioned, my dad worked most Saturdays. And then my mom had to work overtime and a lot of jobs to keep me in private school. So to this point, we are not going to church at all by the time I'm 11, 12 years old. And my only time I'd go to church in any form was school masses and mass on the weekends if I'd like stayed over at a friend's house and they were going to mass. those are really my only encounters with any church. So up until this point, my teachers are basically the most steady role models in my life. And I didn't love a lot of my teachers when I was in grade school, to be perfectly honest with you. I really liked my kind of K through 4 teachers. And I got into 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. Definitely didn't like them nearly as much, and it probably coincided, and I'm sure that my behavior had something to do with that, right? They didn't love me either. Or I shouldn't say they didn't love me, but they probably didn't like me very much. So I am here, going through all this stuff kind of at home. The only time I have any peace, I feel like, or calmness is at church, and I only go to church through school and at friends' houses, but all to our parish, to St. Margaret Mary's in Pembroke, Pennsylvania. So when I'm 13, I had already watched the other students go through all their sacraments, right? They had gone through First Communion. I saw them get their first confessions done. And now when we're 13, this is when the year of confirmation. So I'm going through confirmation classes. This is going to be my third sacrament I've watched my classmates go through that I'm not going to get. I'm not going to receive. And there was just something in me that was like, man, I think I want to do this, right? Like the only time I go to church or experience God is at the Catholic Church, and I'm Lutheran, but we're not really practicing Lutheran. So I'm like, what's the point? Like, why am I not getting these sacraments? Why am I not getting this stuff done? Why am I not receiving communion at Mass? Why am I not going to confession? I believe everything my teachers have taught me. I don't understand personally how more kids that come from, lukewarm or non-existent Christian backgrounds don't convert at Catholic schools. Because for me, it was just like, I believed what my math teacher taught me about algebra. I believed what my science teachers taught me about biology and chemistry and physics. I believed what my history teachers taught me about the Civil War and World War I and World War II and world history. And so it's like, how do I then go to religion class and not believe what I'm taught here? I think when you're a kid, you just trust the authority figures in your life and you believe the things that they teach you. And so for me, it was like, okay, I believe this. I want to become Catholic. So I told I don't know who I wish I had more insight and more memory to this time of my life, because I really don't know that much. I'd love to know who the first person I told was when I said I want to become Catholic. Because it's really interesting that I just have no recollection of it. I don't know if I told our pastor. I don't know if I told my religion teacher, my homeroom teacher, or what. But we were in a school that I always describe my Catholic school. Very grateful for it. I'm very grateful for the teachers that I had. But we weren't, a super authentically Catholic school. We weren't taught a ton about true Catholicism. And what I mean by true Catholicism, I mean like frequenting the sacraments. I mean learning how to pray. I mean going to adoration, having powerful encounters with Christ on school retreats. Like this was not the type of Catholic school that I went to, right? So when I said I wanted to become Catholic, I don't even know who would have been the person I would have told, but I told somebody, they told somebody else, and that person eventually told our pastor, who was Father Dan Powell. And I attribute a lot of my life and the goodness in my life now to Father Dan. So shout out to Father Dan. I love him. I love you, Father Dan, if you're listening, if you ever hear this. And so they tell Father Dan, and Father Dan's like, yeah, let's just go ahead and get it done. I think the kids had already done their confirmation, so I'm pretty late into the game here at this point. But Father Dan was like, you know what? You've already done all the things that we teach kids or we teach people at RCIA. So there's really no need for you to go through RCIA because you just did 9 years of Catholic schooling. And I think some people kind of frown upon that or look upon that like, wait, you should go through RCIA. Like RCIA is important. And I'm not saying RCIA is not important, but if we're not teaching Catholic school kids in 9 years what we teach RCIA in 9 months, what the hell are we doing? Like, why would I need to go through that again? I don't know that I learned everything I should know before becoming Catholic, but I know that I had enough time to learn it. And so in theory, I think he had the right idea there. So anyways, I receive confirmation. I tell my parents, when I asked my mom about it recently, she says that she doesn't really have any memory of having negative feelings. I think because at the time we were not like well-formed Lutherans, right? We weren't like Lutherans with objections to Catholicism. We were just kind of Lutheran because we were Lutheran, right? It just was what we were. And so I think when I told my mom, she was like, sure, like I sent you to Catholic school because I wanted you to learn about God. It's great that you love God enough to want to like take some type of ownership over your faith. And when I told my dad again is like a non-Christian. He's living with two families. Like, he doesn't care. He's like, cool. They came, my grandparents came. I don't know if anybody else in my family came to my confirmation day. I believe it was just like a school mass that we did it. And it was a pretty cool example to the other kids. I think it's great at Catholic schools when you have converts within the student body. And so I became Catholic, and that was kind of that, right? I was like, one day I was not Catholic, the next day I was. And so that was pretty cool. Now, this is something that happens a lot of time in your life, right? If you have a spiritual high, a spiritual mountaintop that you hit, you're oftentimes going to be hit with some serious adversity on the other side of that. So that's exactly what happened to me. I got rocked that next year. I think the devil realized that I was an influential kid, and I was always just kind of a natural born leader. I was somebody who liked to take charge, somebody who liked to organize the friend group, somebody who liked to be a difference maker. And I did that in both positive and negative ways many times throughout my life. And so when the devil realized this, he was like, hell no, we got to make something happen here. And so I just got hit with a full-blown barrage, right? Just assaulted with spiritual warfare in that next year. And that led to me in the next year after I converted, lost my virginity at 14, started smoking weed, and started drinking. I think the order that I went in was, I think I smoked weed first, and this all happened in 2008, right? So this is the year I turned 15, but I was 14 years old going into it, right? So 14 for the first half of this year. Smoked weed in like February, lost my virginity like 3 or 4 months after that, and then that fall of my sophomore year, so technically I was 15 when I had my first beer. It was a Miller Lite. I still remember the party house we were at. I remember kind of faking with the older kids like I was drinking it because I thought it was so disgusting. And all of that happened right away, right? So this was kind of all boiling up. You can imagine and kind of trace it back to when I was 10 years old, and I'm encountering all this kind of adult stuff, from South Park to Grand Theft Auto to Chappelle Show to this rap music. And so, as I mentioned before, I'm kind of living this life that I think this is what it means to be a man, right? It means, what does it mean to be a man? It means that you smoke weed. It means that you hook up with girls. You're having sex as much as you can. You're doing the stuff that rap music's talking about, and you play sports, and you drink, right? The kind of party lifestyle. That was what I thought it meant to be a man. Now, what's really interesting, and I was kind of getting at this earlier, but I didn't go deep into it, is this is the most random fact of my life that I think really contributes to who I was and who I became. When I was growing up, and this was true for all of my childhood that I can remember, because I went to Catholic schools, and I went to Catholic school that was not the closest school to me, I had a really long bus ride. This is like a most random thing, but I had this hella long bus ride. To get to school in the morning was about 45 minutes, and my bus ride home in the afternoon was about an hour, which is super interesting because I hate the idea of a long commute now, but I really had it as a kid. And one thing I remember about that bus ride is I would listen to music on my little CD player, later like my iPod Touch, but I would listen to music and I would just like think about my life. For the majority of the bus ride, I was just quiet. On the way home from school, I remember we would pick up kids at different schools on the way home, and I was literally, I think it was the second pickup in the morning, and I was the last stop in the afternoons. As you can imagine, dude, an hour bus ride in the freaking afternoons. I would just stop and think about my life. I would think about my friends. I would think about my parents. I would think about my grandparents. I would think about all these different people in my life. And I just remember on a regular basis, I was evaluating ideas. I was evaluating the people live their lives, the things people said were the right way to live, the things that brought people joy, the things that brought me joy, the things that made me sad. And it just created this deep awareness in this. I was like, I feel like I was excavating a cave, right? Like almost digging down when you're digging a hole, trying to lay the foundation of a house. When you're trying to build a skyscraper or build a house, the taller you're building the building, the deeper you have to go down to build the foundation. And I think God does this a lot in our own lives, right? Is that we have to go deep in order to go up, in order to build up, in order to have this interior castle that St. Teresa of Avila talks about, or just to build something of our lives. We have to go deep, we have to go down. Going deep and going down can happen in a number of different ways. It can happen through adversity. It can happen through just prayer and holiness. It can happen through deep introspection. It can happen through a combination of these and other things. But for me, I think that these bus rides were really, really impactful. So the fact that I had these super, super long bus rides where I would just stop and think about my life was, super powerful for me. And I would just stay there and I would think about all the different ways that my life was crazy, all the different ways that I was suffering, all the different ways that I was struggling with trust with other people, why I was constantly getting in trouble at school, why I was, struggling in my friendships, or all the different changes and things happening in my life. I was just constantly reflecting and always thinking about these things. And so it was really, really powerful, and it really made a difference in my life and in what I thought, and all of that. So by the time I'm 15 years old, I'm thinking about things, and I'm still kind of balancing the fact that I am struggling with self confidence and who I am. And there was a very obvious reason for that. So I'm 15, I'm living this lifestyle that is very contrary to the way God wants us to live, right? And I mean, I was very promiscuous at this time, right? Like I'm cheating on my girlfriend oftentimes, sometimes like basically dating two girls at once. Just terrible. And I think there's the theological aspect of it, and there's just kind of this practical aspect of it that's leading me to being very unhappy at this point in my life. And I think the theological aspect of it is just you're not happy when you're living a life of sin, right? There's just a reality that sin is very heavy. Sin darkens the intellect. Sin weighs on you, right? It's not a good way to live your life. It doesn't lead to joy and happiness and fulfillment. The fruits of the Holy Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control. We don't have those when we're living in a life and you've created a heart and a mind that is hostile to the Spirit of God. You're not going to experience joy, peace, patience. And so I didn't have those things. So that's the kind of theological and spiritual side of it. The practical side of it is that I had some pretty strong disdain towards my father at this point in my life, towards my oldest brother and other people who had just lived very sinful lifestyles and had abandoned their post and had not been the man that they needed to be. And here I am being the exact same way. So I find myself, smoking weed, doing all these things that I'm on this same path that they were on. And I in many ways hated them. At times in my life, hated them, disliked them, definitely didn't look up to them, saw the damage and destruction that their lifestyle had done. And here I am doing the exact same thing. Here I am following in the exact path that they were on. And it was just very difficult to handle. It was difficult to look at myself and to see that and to just know that I was hurting people the same way that they had hurt me, the way they had hurt my mother. And I remember there was one day, and this is kind of the next part of the story, when I'm 15. So I basically lived this whole life, right? I started smoking weed, like I said, it was like February of freshman year, turned 15 that summer. And I'm just going deeper and deeper into this. And so I was a big basketball player. So when I was young, I played all kinds of different sports. I played baseball, soccer. I started soccer when I was like 5, baseball when I'm, 6, 7, whatever T-ball age is, basketball all the way throughout. And I really, really fell in love with the game of basketball. I liked other sports, but basketball was just my jam. And I had a basketball hoop in the front of the house, had one in my grandparents' house, and I was playing basketball always. And played football for a year in 7th grade as well. But basketball was my absolute favorite. And I started that sophomore year off. Now, I'm a pothead. I'm hooking up. I'm doing all these different things, partying. But I had made the JV basketball team. And I remember vividly, this is such a pivotal moment in my life, this experience. It wasn't a moment, I guess. But basketball, my sophomore year, I made the JV team, looking very promising for the varsity team my next 2 years. And I remember my coach telling me, and I'm a scorer, right? I'm a ball hog. I love to shoot. And my coach told me my sophomore year, he said, Nathan, every time you get the ball, I want you to look to score. And I'm like, dude, that's like the best thing you could tell me, right? I'm like, you just spoke to my heart. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is all I want to do is score. And you're telling me, coach, I have the green light to shoot every time I have the ball from you, my coach. It was amazing. And so I was super excited about that and just really looking forward to getting after it. But I was smoking so much weed that I was becoming worse and worse throughout the season. I stopped practicing in my off time. I stopped doing the things that had got me to this point. And so this all kind of came to a head at two different points. But first, come like December time, I'm going from expected to be the leading scorer on the team to now I'm coming off the bench to now I'm like barely getting any playing time, all in a span of a few months because I had basically self-sabotaged and ruined myself and just regressed as a player because of my activities outside of the gym. At the same time, like I didn't care about school. My grades were mediocre at best. I was fairly intelligent. Hopefully, you know that if you've been following me for a while. I'm not the dumbest guy in most rooms, but I'm also not the smartest guy in most rooms. But I was smart enough that I could like kind of half-ass my homework, know when I needed to try, when I didn't, to kind of average around a B. I was like a 3.0, high twos, low threes student. Could have easily been, I think, a 4.0 student looking back on it had I actually applied myself, but I didn't. So mediocre grades. I'm falling behind in school though, like getting worse at basketball, and my party life and all that kind of stuff was increasing. At this point, I'm coming off the bench and all that, so I decided to quit the basketball team. Just left my jersey and stuff in the locker room after a game one day where I barely played, and was like, I'm done. So I quit the basketball team. Come the next month, a month or two later, I'm thinking about starting to sell weed. A lot of the football players and just different guys at the school have been talking to me about it, and it's like they're making a lot of money doing this. My parents are struggling financially or whatever, and I'm like, you know what? This would be a good move because I can make a lot of money. I've always had that entrepreneurial mindset, and so I'm like, I'm going to start doing this. And I remember it's kind of funny because it's not funny, but it's interesting when you see certain traits, right, that pop back up later in life. And it's funny that I took out this blank piece of paper, which is something I do to this day. I did it today, honestly, kind of brainstorming and thinking about some of my goals for 2024. I'm big on just give me a blank sheet of paper, give me some time to think, and I just write down some goals and trying to work out the math, right? And so I was basically working out the math of how much money do I need up front to buy enough, weed to be able to sell enough weed, and what price would I have to mark it up at, and how much money could I make in a week, a month, whatever. And so I was thinking about all this stuff, right? And I'm getting deeper into it. And so I remember taking that piece of paper and I balled it up and just threw it away. Now, little to my knowledge at this point in my life, my mom and my best friend's mom were onto us, right? They knew that we were starting to smoke. They knew we were just kind of acting a little different. So they're starting to pick up on it. And my best friend was an idiot, and he would leave his cell phone out. And his mom saw some text messages from me to him talking about bringing a lighter, talking about different, activities that we were getting into. And so she found that, told my mom. They're going back and forth. My mom one day, I'm out at a friend's house, smoked a ton, smoked so much that I remember I was high the next morning when she picked me up from my friend's house. And she had like police searched my room the night before, found weed, like blunts that we were using, found all kinds of different things. She found condoms in my room, a whole pack of condoms in the room. She found my piece of paper that I did my whole like business plan on and crumpled up and threw away. She found everything. So she doesn't say anything to me right away. And this is one of the coldest things she ever did. She took me out to breakfast. And I remember we went out to breakfast like Bob Evans or Eaton Park or something. And we had breakfast together. And she's just pissed off the entire breakfast. And I can tell she's mad. I don't know why. But we just had breakfast together. And she was mad as hell. And wouldn't tell me why. I was like, we'll talk when we get home. And so I'm like, okay. So we get back to the house. I still remember this very vividly. She sits me down in this chair. She sits across the room and she's like, do you have anything you want to tell me? And I'm like, I've been in a lot of trouble at this point in my life, so I'm not super fazed by it. But I'm like, no, what could I possibly want to tell you, Mom? Right? Like, I mean, I was very big on the no snitching and trying to keep it together as much as you could. And so she's like, do you have anything you want to tell me? And I'm like, no, I have nothing I want to tell you. I can't imagine anything I'd want to tell you in this moment. And that was not a lie. I didn't want to tell her a damn thing. So she's like, are you sure? And I'm like, yes, I don't know what you want. I don't know what you want from me. So we go back and forth a little bit. Then finally she's like, I searched your room. And I'm like, oh shit. And she's like, going on and on, disappointed in me, lays into me, understandably so. And she's like, you have to tell your dad. I have no idea to this day if she ever told my dad or if I was actually telling him for the first time. But my mom said, you have to tell your dad. And so I'm like, all right. So he gets home from work later that day, has a long day. Every time I asked my dad, how was your day? He said it sucked. So this is this is the attitude, the morale level we're working with my father when I say, hey, how was your day? It sucked. I'm like, oh, I got some things to tell you. So I tell him, they talk about it. We have a conversation kind of as a family. They're like, you got to stop doing drugs. What was interesting and kind of wild, though, looking back on it now from the Catholic perspective, is I just remember them telling me, like, we're just glad you're being safe with the sex thing because of the condoms. They were disappointed. It was kind of a shock, I think, just because, I'm 15, I'm their baby boy. But the disappointment was largely around the weed. It wasn't really an issue of you're having sex too young, like don't do this, you could ruin your life, you could get somebody pregnant. It was just like, we're glad you're being safe. Which, as you can imagine, from a place of chastity is pretty crazy. So at this point, like I get in trouble, I'm grounded for a few weeks or whatever. My girlfriend is allowed to like sleep over. So she would lie to her parents someday and say she would sleep over at a friend's house, sleep over at our house. So 15, 16 years old, my girlfriend's allowed to stay over, basically cohabitating, and all of that. So it was just kind of an accepted thing at that point. We didn't really talk about it again. I really did, because I had this moment, when I had written the paper out, before I crumpled up and threw the paper out, I broke down in tears because I just kind of realized what I was becoming. And I had this desire to stop smoking, but I really didn't know the way out. I didn't know how to get to that point where I could actually stop, because it was just like I was so deep into it. I'm considering actually selling drugs. And I'm just like becoming that guy. Like, this is my reputation now at school. And so it was really difficult, and I just didn't see a way out. So I was kind of relieved in a sense to have gotten caught. I was just like, man, this is a relief. This is a good reason for me to stop. I can tell people like, hey man, my parents are onto me. I got in a ton of trouble. Like, I'm trying to step back. And it actually worked for a good bit. I really did kind of cut back and didn't smoke, but maybe once a year, twice a year from then on out for the rest of high school. And then when I got into college, I stopped completely. But it was a very difficult and trying time. I remember I still kind of was struggling during that time. I would sneak out. We were joyriding a lot, so we'd take our parents' cars, and the fastest I'd ever driven a car until I was 27 was when I was 15. I didn't even have my permit yet, and we would go out and we'd pick each other up and all sneak out of our houses, and we'd go and drive around, and we're basically drag racing on the highway. And so it was dangerous. It was reckless. It was crazy. Almost got in trouble with that one time. I remember trying to sneak back into my house with two of my friends, and the door ended up being locked, and it was just this whole freaking thing. And yeah, it was just crazy. It was wild times. I mean, I was just living just a lawless, reckless, no morals, no rules existence. My first 2 years of high school, I also got in trouble a lot. I think it was 11 detentions my freshman year and 10 detentions sophomore year. Got suspended sophomore year, so I got in-school suspension, got caught for cheating. This was another kind of sting operation in my life. Our Spanish teacher was catching on that a lot of us were having similar answers, getting similar grades on tests. And so she purposely passed out tests with different questions on it, reordered the questions and things like that. And so I got in trouble for that, and they were trying to pin me down and get me to snitch on other people, and that wasn't going to happen. But I got in a ton of trouble. So this all happens my sophomore year, right? So get suspended, get caught cheating, get caught smoking weed, quit the basketball team, and all these new things introduced into my life. And I'm kind of having this like, this is really kind of my first kind of conversion of heart, where I'm like, this is my conversion from I'm an absolute trash bag of a human being, and I'm trying to like be like, I don't want to be terrible anymore. Still was living very unchaste, still kind of just transitioned from smoking to drinking, because I didn't really have like alcoholics in my family, but I did know people who had gone to prison for selling drugs and things like that. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to transition a little bit. And so I just started partying and drinking and still hooking up and doing all these things. But I did have this desire to reintroduce God to my life. So up until this point, I'm going to mass kind of hit or miss. Sometimes my mom would come with me. If she's working on the weekends, wouldn't go, or I'd have my dad drop me off, even in the midst of all this terribleness. But especially at this point, when I'm trying to get my life back together, I really wanted to start going to church. Told my mom that. We started going together more regularly. And then by the time I turned 16, when I got my driver's license, I never missed mass again. Got my driver's license about halfway through my junior year of high school. And at this point, I'm getting it together a little bit. I didn't get any more detentions for the remainder of high school. So I had gotten 21 and a suspension through my first 2 years. Junior and senior year, I didn't get in trouble at all. So then I kind of live out the rest of my high school years, go on some really powerful retreats, and graduate from high school. And so then I'm off to college. All right, so I just want to take a quick break here to tell you about locals. So Seeking Excellence, we've been around for about 3 years now. And the goal and mission of Seeking Excellence is to help other people thrive, to help give people the purpose, direction, and motivation they need to be excellent in life, to fulfill their life's potential in all of the 7 pillars of excellence. So we have mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, financial, professional, and social. So I talk about a wide range of different issues. If you've never listened to the podcast before, this will be news to you. So I talk about a wide range of different issues and topics, things that are relevant, areas of your life that you have to take personal responsibility. And if that's something that's interest to you, I encourage you to join us on Locals. That is where I go deeper with my content, where I share my written content. It's where I share more of the resources that have helped to form me, as you're about to hear in this next part of my story, of the many different things and resources that have come into my life, from books to podcasts to videos to people that have helped me to become the man that I am today. And so if you'd like to support the podcast, you'd like to go deeper into the content that we're creating here, I encourage you to join us at seekingexcellence.locals.com. There you can become a supporter for as little as $10 a month. Supporters get access to additional things like a book club and exclusive swag and things like that we'll be doing. I've got some fun stuff coming out early 2024, and each person that's a supporter will be getting a free copy of that as well. So if you're interested in that, you can join us at seekingexcellence.locals.com. We'll, of course, include it in the show notes. And without further ado, let's get back to the story. All right, so after high school, I guess towards the end of high school, I obviously, like most people, was kind of funneled into the college, the college pipeline. And so I remember when I told you about, when I was 15 and got caught with smoking weed and all that, and my mom was very unhappy with me. I remember just kind of going through this kind of panicked crisis of, how am I going to get out of this, right? How am I going to get out of this mess? How am I going to get back on the right track that I feel like I was once on, of becoming a good man, of being a good person? And I had always dreamt of, at least since I was 10 for sure, but a little bit before that as well, I think, of being in the military. So I told my mom, a few weeks after the whole, getting caught meltdown, I was like, hey, I think I'm just going to enlist in the Army. And obviously, if you watch movies and you hear stories of different people, the whole like go to war, go to jail, I had really thought that was a great way to get my life together. I'm like, I'm just going to clean up my act. I'm going to enlist in the military after high school, and that's going to be that. My mom was very against that idea. She's like, I did not work multiple jobs for you to just go enlist in the military. Like, you have to go to college. Like, I invested so much into your education, so you have to go to college. And I was like, okay, fair enough. Because I was very combative and argumentative on many different topics, but I couldn't deny the fact. I couldn't argue with the fact that my mom had worked really hard for me to get to where I was, and for me to get to private school. And I had already wasted so much of that academically. And so I didn't want to do that anymore. And so I'm like, okay, you're right. I won't enlist in college, or I won't enlist into the Army. I will go, or the Marines, I will go to college somewhere. And so when I'm applying to colleges, I applied to 5 different schools, got into all 5 of them. I say it was largely because of affirmative action, because my grades weren't that great, but also wasn't applying to Harvard. So it could have just been my, slightly above average grades. But I applied to 5, got into 5. I visited 3 of them. And the third one I visited was the one I ended up choosing, which was Mount St. Mary's University in Maryland. And so I can still remember my visit day from the Mount. And one of the things that really impacted me from that visit day was I felt like it was the first time in my life, genuinely, the first time in my life, or one of the first times in my life, that I had come across people who had joy. I had definitely met people and knew people who were happy, or had been happy for a time or a season in their life, I didn't know anybody that was truly, genuinely joyful. And so this was a big game changer for me. I remember just like encountering the people, meeting Father Brian Nolan, who was our chaplain at the time, meeting some of the teachers and the students that were there. And at this point, the Mount is still a Newman Guide school, so it's still pretty authentically Catholic. We had President Powell back then, and he was great. And so he was leading the school really well. It was a very Catholic place, and I knew that I wanted to be closer to God. I knew that aside from the military, the other thing that could really help me to get my life back on track and back in order was a relationship with God. And so knowing that, I just was so drawn and so attracted to this joy that these people had. And so I was like, you know what? Maybe if it's possible for them, it could be possible for me as well. Maybe I could also experience this. Maybe I could also have some of this joy. And if I'm here where they are, maybe I'll be able to kind of pick up on it, see what it is that's bringing it about in their lives, and start to bring that into my own life as well. So I get back in the car. I remember both my parents had come on this trip, and they're like, "So what did you think? Like, how'd you feel about it?" And I was like, "I'm going to go here." They'd offered me a pretty decent scholarship, and I was like, "I'm going to go here. Like this has to be it." None of the other places. I went to one public, like just state school, and then one that was like a Protestant school, and I was like, the other two, I knew what kind of person I would become if I just went to a secular state school. I think there's a place for that in the Catholic world for Catholic people, young Catholics, to go to state schools, secular colleges. But I think you got to be pretty rooted in order to do that. And so I knew I was trying to get away from some of the party lifestyle. And so in order to do that, I had to go to a place that was going to be a little bit more conducive for that. The Mount still had a pretty big party culture and all of that. So it wasn't, the Garden of Eden by any means, but it was still better than going to some, just state university. And so I decided to go to the Mount over the summer. Throughout my senior year, I found out that my biggest rival in basketball, at this point I'm playing CYO, like Catholic Sports League kind of thing. My biggest rival in basketball was also going to the Mount, and he was going to run track. His name was Tommy. And so Tommy and I hung out because we were the only people we knew at the freshman orientation over the summer. And then we were like, man, I thought I hated you, but you're actually kind of cool. So we became really good friends. I actually just saw his mom not too long ago, which was a huge blessing. And we became good friends, and we ended up rooming together all 4 years. But we get there freshman year, and during freshman year, kind of out of the gate, we both had this, I think, kind of similar goal, right, of not becoming just party people right away. Tommy was very dedicated and committed to running track and cross country. And it was a dedication and commitment that I always really admired, because he really did, and progressively more and more over the 4 years, make a lot of sacrifices, and was just super dedicated to it. He was willing to give up, for drinking, and he really cleaned up his diet over time, and he won conferences, and he was an awesome athlete. And we get into our freshman year basically, and the first 3 weeks we just go absolutely hard, right? So it was kind of like the kind of classic, as soon as you get there, you just kind of the guardrails are off. And I didn't really have any guardrails at home. So for me, this is not that different, but I didn't act any different because of that, right? So I get there, and the first 3 weeks, it's I'm vomiting every weekend, right? Because I'm drinking too much. Still hooking up and doing all these things. And I'm like, man, I really got to get this together. So after a few weeks, we kind of have a meeting together, or we're just kind of chilling in our room, and we're like, we can't do this for the next 4 years, right? We just kind of both know in our hearts, we're like, we can't continue on living like this for 4 years. It's just not sustainable. I'm like, man, I'm going to drop out of college if I keep doing this, right? If I keep behaving like this. And so we kind of make that commitment then that we're going to all right, maybe this weekend, we're just not going to drink. We're not going to go out. We're just going to, hang out, watch football, whatever. And so we did that. We kind of pulled it back. And from there, around the same time, very close to this, I started to realize that the chapel is open. So our chapels on campus were open 24/7. As God would have it, our room, Tommy and I's dorm room in Pangbourne, we were Pang 161, baby. And if you walked in the front of Pang, all the way down to the left, at the very end of that hallway was the door from the inside to the chapel, to the Pangbourne Chapel. If you were standing at the door handle for the Pangbourne Chapel and you looked directly to your left, 90 degrees, didn't even take a step, you could also touch our door handle. And so the Lord, I always joke and think that that's so funny that God was just like, I need to keep a close watch under you. And I need you to be close to me. And if you don't want to get close to me, I'm going to make you close to me and going to give you, like, make you blatantly choose to not spend time with me. And so that's what God did. So I was able to get into that chapel 24/7. Our main chapel, the Immaculate Conception Chapel at the Mount, is awesome. And I spent a ton of time in there. And so I start going to the chapel, and I'm just going to kind of sit here and figure out how to talk to God. At this point, I had already read my Bible a little bit in prayer and things like that. So I started to read scripture, and I'm like, I don't really know where to start, but I just started kind of reading the Gospels and the letters. And I started to see just kind of this change in me. I was just like, man, like actually spending time before the Lord in the Blessed Sacrament was actually making a difference in my life. I was like, I'm becoming a better person. I felt myself being more patient. I think the first thing that really healed in me, and I haven't talked about this too much, but I had a ton of anger. So my family, like I said, we fought a lot growing up, and it was just like yelling and very unhealthy conflict resolution, right? If you could even call it that, because not a lot of stuff got resolved. But I was super angry. And so I was just known for, I mean, I remember like yelling at my girlfriend in like the high school parking lot and just like acting out. I was really harsh on my friends and my family and things like that. And so that was one of the first things that I just felt like I started to develop this deeper consciousness and this deeper awareness of how I felt, what I was experiencing, what I was going to say. I actually became thoughtful for the first time in my life of like, what am I actually going to say to people and how might this affect them, right? You know, like the whole, like, is it kind, is it necessary, and is it true kind of stuff, like started to evaluate the things that were going to come out of my mouth for the first time ever. And so I really didn't know how to pray. Nobody had ever taught me, but I just kind of had this mindset. I'm going in here and I'm like, I have to figure out who I'm going to be, right? If I'm going to start with this fresh slate, I've already developed, you know, a mild reputation, but it's not too late to reverse it. But I have to figure out who I want to be if I want to have God in my life. And so I kind of created this like 4-year plan for myself. And this could be a own podcast in itself. And so I'll save some of this, but just to give you kind of the 4 steps for my 4 years was figuring out who I wanted to become in freshman year. Sophomore year was figuring out how to become that person. Junior year was about practicing being that man. And then senior year was about kind of refining from the things that I learned, the holes that I saw in myself my junior year. So I'm in the midst of this in freshman year, and I'm spending time in silence for the first time ever. And I'm sitting before God, and I'm really diving into scripture. And I always tell people that, you know, like prayer is not easy. It's not an easy thing to do, right? It's like going to the gym for the first time. I remember when I learned how to work out, it was also very similar to that, where it was like, this is very challenging. This is very difficult to learn how to do. But it was, a huge blessing to be able to sit there and kind of suffer through that, right? To have the kind of growing pains that you're going to have in any endeavor, right? Whenever you're trying something for the first time, a lot of times we just assume that prayer is going to be easy or else it's not for us. God's not speaking to me. And it's like, no, dude, you have to give it more than 2 minutes, right? You have to give it more than 5 minutes. You have to give it more than one day. You have to give it a significant amount of time. And so when you make that commitment, you actually start to show up. God starts to move and God starts to do things. He responds to that. But too often we don't actually show up. So here I am, I'm praying. That was basically the mark of my first semester. At the end of that first semester, especially after I got my drinking kind of under control, I was still drinking, don't get me wrong. I didn't stop, but had gotten a little bit better and kind of cleaned it up. And I was in the honors program, which is a huge game changer in my life. And I, again, could do an entire podcast on the lessons I learned from being in the honors program, but I actually tried a little bit harder. I was really encouraged by my mom to do it. This is another thing I think was just affirmative action because I had much worse grades than some of the kids who didn't get into the honors program, but it ended up being a huge blessing in my life. And I tried for the first time in school. And so I ended up, I had a 3.43. I still remember my fall. And to make Dean's List was a 3.4. And I don't know if I had easy classes. I don't know if I just studied more or whatever, but that lit a fire under me because it was the highest GPA I'd ever received. I was kind of the mindset that college is supposed to be harder. And so the fact that I had done better in harder classes, I was like, man, maybe this like studying and doing all of my homework and showing up to class and all that, they might be onto something with this, you know? I was like, maybe this actually does work. And so this was also really huge for me because at this point in my life, I'm pretty liberal, politically speaking, and really bought into a lot of the oppression narrative, right? Like Black people are oppressed, I'm being held down. I really bought into this when I was in high school and kind of blamed a lot of my issues and a lot of my getting in trouble on the fact that I was Black. And so I, buying into that, had a hard time, accepting anything else or taking responsibility or accountability for my actions. And so that was a difficult thing. It was challenging, but I realized through this whole experience, right, of having made the dean's list the first time ever in my life, any type of honors since I was, in grade school. I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to be on dean's list every semester. I think the next semester I got like a 3.6. The highest I got was like a 3.75 or something like that. But I did pretty well, and I made dean's list all 8 semesters of college, which I was really, really proud of throughout my entire time. That second semester, senior year, was pretty tough to stay motivated, but I did it and I made it. Another big thing, so Father Dan, who I mentioned before, Father Dan Powell, was still present in my life and active. I don't know why, because I was ridiculous. I was a ridiculous human, but he stayed active in my life and continued to be a huge blessing to me. And so he would come down typically once a semester. We'd have lunch together at the Mount, which was just amazing, when I think back to it. And I owe so much to this man, but he would come down and have lunch with me. And then he would, that first fall semester, he told me about his mission trips, which I'd never heard of before. I don't know if I just fell asleep during his homilies or if I wasn't paying attention or what, but I didn't remember, or at least I don't remember remembering, that he would go to the Dominican Republic every January, and he would usually take a group of college kids. And so he's like, you need to come. I'm like, all right, let me ask my parents. I asked my parents, grandparents. They give me the money I needed to go, and I go on my first ever mission trip that January. Also really set my heart on fire. I met the first person that I really thought was a saint in my life, which was Sister Lisa. And Sister Lisa was just an amazing human being. And I still remember some of our prayer sessions that we had while we were there. I still remember little Jeffrey, which was like my best little friend. He was, I think, 7 the first time I went, 9 the last time I went. And it was just a really transformative experience. I mean, talk about to combine the DR experience with the fact that I was kind of being opened up to this idea that, maybe I'm not a victim. Maybe I'm not oppressed. Maybe I can actually have some freedom in my life. I can take responsibility, work hard, put in the effort, and then reap the rewards of the work I put in. Put that in, kind of the Lord has kind of softened me up in that way. And then I go to the Dominican Republic, and I had thought that I'd seen poverty before. I thought that being in the projects in Harrisburg, my dad was always very intentional about like showing me poor neighborhoods. I had family that lived in poor neighborhoods at different points, but I just had not seen real poverty until I went to the Dominican Republic. And so I go to the Dominican Republic, and I mean, the city that we were in El Factor was the town that we were in. It was about a 2-hour drive from Santo Domingo. And there was times though we would drive like an hour to an hour and a half, like dirt road, like crossing streams and stuff like that to get out to some of these remote parishes. And I mean, just to see like the poverty that was there and be like, man, these kids really don't have a choice. They really don't have an option. That was probably the first time in my life that I was committed to being successful for the sake of other people. And I started to understand the importance of me taking advantage of the opportunities that I had. Because prior to this, I'm kind of thinking like, oh, like all of my opportunities in life, like think about me quitting basketball, right? Like that decision was only about me. At this point in my life, all of my decisions basically were only about me. I wasn't really taking anybody else into consideration, not the girls that I was using, not the friends that I was leading astray and into drug use and alcohol, and all of that kind of stuff. Like I didn't think about anybody else, but what I wanted, what I thought, and that was kind of it. And so that was what I based my decisions off of. Seeing this made me really kind of understand how I can play a role in the greater world. That if I don't go back and take advantage of my opportunities that I have, then I'm not going to be able to financially give and support these people who don't have the opportunity to go and make the money. And that was kind of like, I feel like the seeds of my very like capitalistic approach today of, no, we don't all have to go out there and make $1 billion, But we do have a very special opportunity. I feel like it is kind of like an American. I think it's something about seeing the church as exclusively American when we as Catholics don't think that we are obliged to be financially prudent and financially successful, because it's just a fact that not only do we have poor people here in the US, but there's many poor people in other countries that genuinely do not have the opportunity to succeed in life. And so it's like that money has to come from somewhere. Just like the money for all of our church activities, right? Even just keeping the lights on at your parish, somebody's got to pay for that. And so the only way the church makes money is through us. And so this has kind of gave me a new responsibility and a new motivation to keep making Dean's List, keep working hard, think about how I was going to build my resume, think about what my future was going to be. So I declared my major around this time as criminal justice. I really wanted to be a police officer, wanted to be on a SWAT team. And so I get back from the Dominican Republic, and pretty shortly after that, in my sophomore year, they start advertising for Kairos. So the Kairos retreat at the Mount was different than the one I'd gone on in high school, because for some silly reason, I hope they don't still do it this way at my high school at Bishop McDevitt, but for some reason back then, they did the Kairos retreat, maybe just because it was so small. It was boys and girls together. And at the Mount, they did it separate. And so it was men and women were separate. And this was one of the most convicting weekends of my life. So up until this point, I feel like when I heard about chastity, I'd only heard about chastity from men and women I couldn't relate to. Let's put it that way. I think there's a lot of people out there. I shouldn't say it that way. I think there are people out there who are chaste not by choice. Let's put it that way. I always felt like sometimes in high school, like I was being judged by some of the guys who are more Catholic, who might have been leading the retreat and things like that, for the lifestyle that I lived. And I would justify it to myself saying, if you could live this lifestyle, you would. You just can't, right? So there's kind of this like pride there that said, like, these guys just don't have any game, right? Like these guys just don't have the ability to sleep with women. If they could, they would. I didn't really feel like, and this is a genuine thing. This isn't something that I feel like I totally look back on myself and think that this was a stupid thought. I think that this is very real for a lot of people. And this is where I think we have to be somewhat mindful about who we are as evangelists and who we put before people to evangelize. And I just think I've said this a lot, and I think this is something that not a lot of men like to hear, because we live in this kind of like, you got to be nice to everybody and let everybody play equally. But I just don't think that's the case. I think that I suffered a lot because of the men that were put before me, or even the women. Like, I mean, our junior year religion teacher was this like unmarried, overweight, very like not very nice, not very fun, not very happy woman, and she taught us morality. And so she's telling us like, don't have sex or you'll get a disease and you'll be, it's bad for you and all this stuff. And I'm like, you don't like, what do you even know? I'm like, you don't like, you don't have it. You've never had it, or you not that you have to have sex to tell people not to have sex, but even just like you were just like not tempted with this in the way that I am. And so I needed to find somebody that I could relate to that was actually battling the temptation and overcoming it, because it kind of feels like somebody who's overweight telling you how to lift better in the gym if you're in better shape than them is how it feels, even if it's not the case, right? I understand philosophically, theologically, we don't have to be in shape. We don't have to have the perfect story. We don't have to be a perfect person to share the gospel, to share the truth. But I think there's a reality, especially to men, that's like, if you're not in it, I don't want to hear a single unmarried man tell me about how to be a better father, right? I want to hear from a father that has more kids than me, or that has more responsibility than me, or has been doing it longer than me, come and give me advice on how to be a dad. And I felt the same way there, where it's just like, I want you to be like in the fight with me, and people who I felt like were not actively in the fight, because if there's no temptation, there's no battle, right? And I later learned in college too, I had a lot of guys who were addicted to pornography that judged me for, being unchaste with women. And it's another thing that I'm like, if you could, you would. And you've proven that by the fact that you are addicted to watching pornography and addicted to masturbation. That's not, I don't know where you think that's substantially better than if you could do the real thing with another human being, that you wouldn't do it, right? That given the opportunity, you wouldn't do the same thing. So this I think helped me to understand a lot of pride on my end, but also I think important truths about evangelization, and also just important truths about judging other people. Is that we just always judge other people's sins as worse than our own. And being on the receiving end of that helped me to understand better how I want to avoid being on the giving end of that judgment. But I go to Kairos, and this was the first time where I felt like, I say all that to say this, that this is the first time I felt like I met men that were actually battling the temptation that had chosen to be chaste anyways. And so that was a really powerful thing for me. And I saw athletes that were there. There were black dudes that were there. And this was something that was just totally new. And so I had not really seen it. And so it really impacted me. And I felt like I had my second powerful prayer experience of my life that was really like a one-on-one prayer experience, where I felt like God was really telling me. This happened probably 2 to 3 years earlier than that, when I was about 16 or 17, at the most random time. I felt like God had like come to me and said like, hey, I want to use you for something. I really want you to make an impact in the world, in the church. And so I was like, man, I don't know what that means, but okay. But this time, with the whole chastity thing kind of being right next to it or in the midst of it, I was like, I felt God was saying like, you need to be better at this. And so Tommy had gone on the retreat with me, and we basically go back and we decide to have like a radical accountability together, whether it be with girls or it be with pornography or whatever it was, right? Like we were just like, we need to be radically accountable to each other about our chastity. So any failures that we have, we need to tell one another. And we started to do that. And I mean, it changed our lives. It was really, really impactful. It was brutal and uncomfortable. And I mean, you got to understand, me and homie had only been friends for like 3 months. So this isn't some like lifelong friendship, right? That we are now, able to like have that vulnerability with each other. This is something that is still pretty new. And so we decided to do this. This was really impactful. Summer comes along. I start Army ROTC around this time, really getting more serious about it my second semester of my freshman year. And going to the summer, that summer, we go to the beach, me, Tommy, and my mom. Me, Tommy, and my mom go to the beach, and we are there for a week, but we had my dad come about halfway through the week. The year before that, we went to Maui. My mom saved up a ton of money to take us to Hawaii, and me, my mom, and my dad went to Maui. And I don't want to say my dad like fully ruined the trip, but he was definitely a damper. He had this special skill and talent, and I always felt really sorry for my mom for this, because my mom, from my recollection, paid for most of our vacations, and my parents always had like totally separate finances. My dad had this special desire to ruin good things. And I don't say that just to trash my dad, but I'm just trying to be transparent about my experience in life as I share this story with you. And it was just something I never understood. It was like he was often difficult. I think there's probably like some undiagnosed ADHD there, some impulse control issues. There's a lot of emotional irregulation and problems. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this kind of like narcissistic walking on eggshells, never having like consistency emotionally, or feeling any safety in the home in that regard. And it was just something about holidays and vacations that just amped it up, like tenfold. I don't know what it was, but Maui was fun, and I still have good memories from that trip. But I just remember still having just huge fights out there. I mean, it was like we couldn't enjoy anything. And I remember my mom just feeling that and just feeling drained in that way, of just being like, can't anything ever be easy? Even when we're on vacation, we can't make you happy. And so we decided after my freshman year, we're like, well, let's just go down. I think I suggested it to her. Maybe it was her suggestion. I'm like, let's go down for like half the week, just you, me, and Tommy. And then Dad, my sister Nicole, and her kids can come down for the second half of the week. And so we go down and have a great like 3 or 4 days, just the three of us. It was awesome. We had a great time. And so we're living the dream. Then my dad comes on Wednesday. We're driving to dinner, and I'm driving. And I can remember it, dude. I can remember pulling up to this damn stop sign. It was one of those things that was like a stop sign crossing. There was only a 2-way stop sign. And the lanes that were kind of passing in front of us, there were 2 lanes each. So it was a crazy, crazy crossing. And I just remember pulling up to it. And we had already my dad was a big backseat driver because he was a truck driver. And he just liked to give unsolicited advice for anything in life, but he was especially prone to do it while in the car. And so we were pulling up to this stop sign, and I just remember he said something to me, and I start like going off and losing it, right? Because I'm already stressed. I'm already like, nervous about making this crossing or whatever. And we get in this huge fight the remainder of the drive, which is pretty short. I think it was like a 15-minute car ride to dinner. And we get to dinner, and he like wouldn't come inside the restaurant. I think he wanted me to apologize, whatever. I refused. As I got closer to getting my ROTC scholarship and realized I didn't need his money anymore, our whole dynamic changed. I had no desire to just like constantly try to appease him. I felt like I was more of a man and more on like equal footing rather than just being like a child that had to like constantly be beaten down and not speak up for itself. I had never fully had that. Like I was never just like a totally, just totally roll over and give up in every battle or fight. As you can imagine, right? I always had some fight in me. But it was this time was just different, man. I was just like, you know what? No, I'm not doing it. I'm not caving. I don't need to be talked to that way. And so I didn't. So I didn't apologize. So I let him stay out there. He decided he was going to go home. So he literally drove back from New Jersey to Harrisburg that night. And my mom said, just go ahead and pack your stuff and move out before we come home. She also had enough. And we had a great remainder of the week at the beach. He moved out. My parents later got divorced. That was their final separation. And I always think it's really interesting because it was a fight that I had with him. And that was something that was always really hard for me because one thing I didn't mention, there's so much to go into, but one thing I didn't mention is that there was 3 different times when I was a kid. Remember I said that my parents were on and off from like 10 to 14? For some reason, it would just happen this way that I went on a different trip every summer without my parents, 10, 11, and 12. And my parents, I remember, would be separated before I went on my trip. And then I went to Australia as a 10-year-old on this like student ambassador program. 11 years old, I went on like this 5-week road trip with my grandparents to California and back. And then 12, I don't remember what the trip was, but I went somewhere. And every time I left, my parents were separated and I'd come back and they'd be back together. And so you can think of, and I went on a divorce retreat about a year and a half ago. If you have divorced parents, I highly recommend going back and finding my episode called The Damage of Divorce. I think it was really great. I shared basically for an hour of what I picked up at that retreat. Life-Giving Wounds retreat. I want to give a shout out to Life-Giving Wounds. They're really amazing. So anyways, dude, I'm out here and every time I leave and come back, my parents are back together. So you hear, like kids blaming themselves or wondering if it's their fault. Dude, how do you not blame yourself? I don't even know what I was doing. I was only 10, 11, but I'm like, I don't know what it is about me, but my parents don't get along when I'm here because they end up getting back together. And then as fate would have it, at 19, my parents ended up getting divorced after a fight that I got into with my dad. So I don't know, but there was a point I remember when I was a kid, I'd be 10, 11, 12, before my mom would take my dad back when he would leave. I used to beg her not to. I used to say, like, I'll go to public school. We can do whatever we have to do, but it's not worth it. I just felt like the trade-off was not worth it. The house was just so different when he was there. And the thing that was really hard for me was my relationship with my mom was always substantially worse when my dad was present. And I felt like there was kind of this like just divisiveness of pitting people against each other and just manipulation that was just really toxic. And it just always saddened me that I didn't feel like I had a good relationship with either of my parents whenever he was there. And I felt like my relationship with him was better when I didn't see him as often, which has since been true in my life. Which is just a really sad thing. I think it's just such a sad reality that that's the case. And it took a lot of healing for that, right? I had to, as I got into college and started to take more ownership and responsibility for my life, really start to take a deep look at saying like, yeah, you've been through some stuff. You've seen some things. This has been hard, but especially given the purpose and the drive of the Dominican Republic now, I was like, yeah, I got to take responsibility for this and just start to chart a path forward. So that's where the sophomore year came into. How am I going to become this man? So to speed up a little bit, I basically my sophomore year start to just seek any type of wisdom and guidance I can find. So I had a spiritual director. I met with the focus team director. I met with another focus missionary. I met with a student that was kind of discipling me. I was meeting with our school chaplain, Father Brian, whenever I could. And I just had questions, man. I was just asking a ton of questions, trying to go on retreats, or we had like local mission trips and stuff like that I would go on. Went to the Dominican Republic again that year. I got contracted in ROTC that fall. And so that was really big and started to really help with my discipline and getting my life together, which is funny, right? Because I had the whole thing when I was 15, I'm going to enlist. And then I end up joining the military just a few years later through ROTC. But I do all of that. And sophomore year was one of my best years of college for sure. Had an amazing year. Still a lot of setbacks. I don't want to underestimate how much I continued to fall with chastity. Continued a lot of, one-time falls, not really getting into a relationship that was promiscuous or anything like that, but just like going out, making bad decisions, and hooking up with people and doing things like that, hooking up with girls. And it was really interesting. And it was something that was super difficult for me. And I think sophomore year was kind of the pinnacle of this, probably, because it was this kind of transition year. Not by any means that I was perfect junior and senior year, but sophomore year was kind of this like this pinnacle of the battle, or one of the high points of like the fiercest parts of the battle, I think, that God had over my soul, right? With the devil. I think it was becoming very apparent to Satan at this point, to the evil forces of the world, that if I was going to be a force. The only question was whether I was going to be a force for evil or a force for good. But the thing that was not a question was whether or not I was going to be a force to be reckoned with. And so knowing that, I think the devil really sent a lot of forces my way. So I had a lot of temptation. And it was just amazing, man. I would go back and kind of dissect the nights where I would, end up drinking too much, end up hooking up, or whatever it would be. And it was like to see the string of events, right? Where I had to plan for my weekend. I'm going to go to the chapel this evening, then just go hang out or watch football, or maybe, have a couple of drinks or whatever, but I'm just going to relax at home. And then like have a ton of people like pressure me to go out. It's like, all right, I'll go out. I'm still just going to be chill. And then it was just like this string of events. It was like amazing almost to see of how I got pressured to do this and how things ended up, and then ended up with this person. And it was like, it was wild, but I could really see that there was like a strategy, that there was a mind behind it. It seemed like that was just like really orchestrating all of this. And it doesn't take any of my responsibility away, but it just really, it kind of sobered me up to realize that like the devil was after me. Right. And I think that's something that is such just a theme of my life, that I think is important to share, that the devil was really, really after me, and starting to see like, okay, this guy, he's either going to be one of our greatest forces or he's going to be one of our greatest enemies. And so he was trying to win me back. And the hedonistic lifestyle, the promiscuous lifestyle, was the way to do it. It was the pathway to try to get me. And I think there's a lot of reality there. And I've never done a podcast talking about like generational sins, but that was like the sin: control, lust, pride seemed to be the sins that I date back to like especially my paternal side from my grandfather. The few little things that I knew about him, he was a pretty horrible person. Made my dad look like a saint in many ways. And then my dad and my oldest brother and things like that, those seemed to be the sins that would just grip us and take hold on us. And I really didn't feel like I had what it took to fight it, but I felt it was amazing how differently the sins felt, right? When I was 15, 16 and just kind of callous and didn't care about them and didn't really think they were wrong, and still kind of practiced my spiritual life, at least went to mass and things like that. I was so darkened by the sin that I wasn't losing anything, right? So it was like I wasn't really alive. Like there's a certain reality, a spiritual reality, that when you commit mortal sin, your soul dies, right? Like you're cutting off your soul from the source of life. And so if you're constantly in that state, you're not losing anything. But if you are in a state of grace and your soul dies, you get cut off, like even to this day, like I can feel it. Like I can feel the cutting off of that line. And I think the Lord has really allowed me to feel because he knows that he needs me to. He knows that I need to feel it in order to really be responsive, because I'm fighting this intense battle, right, over my soul. And so when it comes to my sophomore year, I'm really, really struggling with this. I'm really embarrassed and struggling going back to confession, going to confession and going to confession again 3 or 4 days later. But one thing I always tell people, my biggest life lesson that I learned during this period of my life was that you have to continue the good even in the midst of the bad. And so what that means is you have to continue doing the good things. You have to continue your prayer, discipleship, attending the sacraments, going to confession, even while you're struggling to break the chains of these sins. And God sometimes doesn't do it overnight. There's sometimes where he does, but there's many times where he doesn't. And so you have to go deeper into yourself. You have to go deeper into your relationship with God, into doing these things in order to persevere and keep going, because that was where my breakthrough was coming. And it's still, I never hit a point in my life. I still haven't hit a point where I'm perfect, right? But I had long stretches of profound grace and holiness, taking deep root in my life, but then would fall. Like, this was just always the path that the devil would use to try to get back at me. And I truly believe that because God wanted to use me as such a force for good, the devil was like, if we can stop this while he's young, if we can get him back into this, if we can get him to follow in his family's footsteps, we're going to save a lot of trouble for ourselves down the road. And so I think it was like a very intense, and I still feel that way sometimes with discouragement and other things that happen in my life. And I don't really ever feel like I have anybody else in my life that understands the seriousness of that. And I get that to a certain extent because nobody was there in my prayer experiences where I feel like God was telling me he wanted me to do big things for him. And I don't know what big things looks like. I don't think that means necessarily, being a famous Catholic speaker. I don't know what it means, but it could just mean raising great children who go on to change and impact the world in profound ways. I don't know, but it's hard not feeling like other people understand your mission or, what God has given you. And that can be really difficult. But I just want to encourage you, if you're in the midst of that, if you're struggling with sins, if you're struggling to move forward spiritually, it's not okay to keep, diving into sin, but it is a reality that you have to keep pushing forward in order to make it out of that, right? The only way through is forward. And so that means keep doing the positive things. So then comes junior year, senior year. This is where I really started to speak. So I got some opportunities to share my testimony as a junior. I did it. People loved it. This is where I started to get asked by RAs to do speaking events for them when they would have events. And I just became kind of known as that guy on campus. And it was something that was always really interesting. And this was true for so much of my life. And I looked at it as a good thing. I think some people look at this as a bad thing. But I used to say, this is especially true when I was in college, that when I was a senior in college, if you asked everyone that knew me as a freshman, if you asked every class, right? If you asked the senior class or junior class, the sophomore class, the freshman class, who is Nathan Crankfield and what is he about? Every class had a different answer. From senior year to freshman, it would have gotten you would have got better feedback, right? My senior year class was really struggling because they had seen me as a freshman and they thought of me as a hypocrite now that I was leading Bible study and leading retreats and speaking on campus about spiritual life. I'd have ex-girlfriends or different people coming by and being like, I know who this guy really is. Then you had like the junior year was kind of a mix. They were kind of like, man, this guy seems to have had a really profound conversion, but I do remember some of his messiness. The sophomores and freshmen, especially the freshmen, really thought highly of me. They really saw me as a holy man. They saw me as someone who cared and loved God and wanted to spread the gospel and share the good news with other people. And so it was always just so interesting because if you looked at the different grade levels, and I still had a lot of friends, obviously, in my senior class, but it was just like such a mix of, my reputation was just such a mix of different things, which was really interesting. And so I really wanted to change that going forward after college because you get another fresh slate, obviously, when you leave college. And so I go through my junior year. I start speaking, sharing, leading Bible study. I go to Dominican Republic again my junior year. And then my senior year, I was encouraged to go to Seek. And so I went to Seek, which is, I'm trying to decide if I want to spend 3 hours doing this podcast or not. But there was some really profound things that happened my senior year. And my senior year, the theme of my senior year really was the Eucharist. And so when maybe I probably can close with this story with the Eucharist. My senior year, because this is where I feel like I was fully converted. So this is my conversion story. It doesn't have to be my life story. But my senior year, I go into it, and at this point, remember I told you I had developed a pretty strong prayer life. We had an ROTC chaplain. I forgot that I was meeting with him sophomore year as well, and he was a seminarian, and his name was Thomas. And Thomas and I met pretty regularly. And I remember Thomas telling me at some point, probably my junior year, that it was a mortal sin if I didn't pray at least 30 minutes a day. For me, not for everyone, but basically saying like, in your situation in life and what God's trying to do in you right now. And I truly believe he was correct in this. He's like, it is, if not a mortal sin, it's a very serious sin. Like, this is not something that like prayer is optional for you at this point. Like, you have a public platform here on campus. You're a big role model to a lot of people. You have to be praying every single day. And it was amazing. I mean, I'm going through this time, guys. The only way I can explain what I felt like prayer was like at this point in my life was I felt like I was getting like a software update. So you know how your iPhone updates every a few months when they want to slow it down so you'll buy the new iPhone. I felt like I was getting the software update every, couple weeks of prayer. If I was praying 30 to 60 minutes a day, it was like by the end of 2 weeks, like I was like on fire and I felt like a new man. And it was truly amazing just to have that experience and just be like, I just remember walking out of the chapel and just feeling so refreshed and different and changed and powerfully impacted. Now, mind you, at this time, I'm still struggling with temptation to sin. I'm dating. I had a girlfriend, one girlfriend junior year, one girlfriend senior year, and neither were, exceptionally chaste. Some points in one relationship was better. Some points in another relationship was better, but we did go into it with the commitment to being chaste. And one I ended because of the lack of chastity, which was still a huge, kind of breaking point in my life. Yeah. And so I'm still kind of struggling with some of this, but God is really doing an immense and incredible work in me and just making me new. And I was just totally different. And just to get to a point where I was able to do that, right? This was something I couldn't even see myself being able to do when I was 30, let alone, 20, when I was 16, 15 years old. Like, when I'm crying to myself thinking about like, why am I about to become a drug dealer at 15? I didn't even think that like the person that I was, the joy and peace that I had was even possible, because I had a ton of anxiety and stress when I was a kid. I remember just constantly having stomach issues as a kid. I was sick a lot. And I think that so much of it had to do with just like the stress that I lived under. And just the weight of that constantly kind of brought me down. But senior year, I go into senior year and I had this great prayer life. But I remember some of the campus ministry kids would be talking about adoration. And I just never, I did it on some retreats or whatever, but I never got it. And if you would have asked me if I believed in the true presence of the Eucharist, I would have said yes, but I didn't have like a reason why. And up until this point, I hadn't had like any type of actual encounter with the Eucharist. And so I remember just being like, this is going to be my year. This is going to be the year that I actually discover this. And so, like I said, you have to give things time. I had to give God a chance in this. And it wasn't that I didn't believe in the true presence, but I didn't understand why adoration was any better than praying with the tabernacle. At this point, I just loved praying in front of the crucifix. The crucifix was kind of my jam. And so a big, beautiful church or a beautiful chapel and a crucifix was all I needed. To be in the presence of the tabernacle was better, but I didn't understand the beauty of adoration. So as God would have it, we would be doing ROTC. Our ROTC Bible study would have adoration twice or once a week on Mondays, I think it was. Maybe we did every other Monday, I can't remember. But then I signed up for my own like 30-minute slot of adoration every week. And so I was basically doing adoration twice a week. The first whole semester goes by, I feel nothing. I'm like, I don't see how this is any different. If anything, I thought it was kind of worse. I was like, this is kind of distracting from the crucifix, and I don't understand why this is thought of to be better. And then I was asked to speak at Mount 2000, which was this awesome retreat that we had for high schoolers at the Mount. And the seminarians would run it, and it was great. And I give my testimony there. It was awesome. I think I did a pretty good job. It was only like 10 minutes, but I spoke in front of like 2,000 people in our gym. And then we had a Eucharist procession after that. And dude, man, when I tell you I broke down, I had cried in prayer a little bit before, like here and there, but never like, this was like an uncontrollably profound encounter with goodness, truth, and beauty that I had never experienced before. And I'm like, I'm this Army guy, I'm this tough guy, right? Like, I have never cried in public. I think this is the only time I cried in public, honestly. It says I was like 6. I don't know when the last time was, but this is just like a losing it type of thing. And the other thing I forgot to mention, this is where I brought this up, is a few weeks before Mount 2000, I went to Seek. At Seek, Father Mike Schmitz gave the Hour That'll Change Your Life talk, the talk on adoration that many people have seen. I think it has like 15 million views. And I've referenced it many, many times in many different talks. And yeah, truly mind-blowing, truly powerful. Yeah, I remember feeling that intellectually and seeing people pass out and seeing people be moved and transformed, and everybody after Seek talking about how like the Eucharist procession that came after his talk that night at Seek like changed their lives. And I'm here and I've been going to adoration twice a week. I'm like trying to figure out this whole true presence thing. And I'm like, I didn't feel anything. What is going on here, right? It didn't make any sense to me. And so this was driving me crazy at this point. And I'm like, Lord, what are you doing to me? Why are you not giving me the opportunity to see you in this, right? And so this was very difficult. It was very hard for me. And I just struggled with it. But I go to do Mount 2000, and that was where I really had my powerful experience and had this kind of life-changing experience. And from then on was very moved by the Eucharist and just up my level of desire to be holy, to be close to God. And I think it was around this time that I broke up with my girlfriend senior year and was just really preparing myself this final semester that I had there at the Mount to go forth and be the light of the world. One of my favorite passages of Scripture comes from the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. So the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus gives us the Beatitudes, and then he goes into the you are the light of the world, you are the salt of the earth. And so maybe we'll close with that. We'll close with a little bit of prayer, and we'll take it from there. All right, so got the Bible here. And remember the Sermon on the Mount is my favorite part of Scripture. Okay, so this sermon that Jesus gives, I think, is the most perfect speech that has ever been given. And I think John 6, obviously, where we pull the Eucharist from and the church's teaching on the Eucharist, so much of it comes from that, is also extremely powerful. But let's start here with Matthew 5. Seeing the crowds, he went up to the mountain. When he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you, and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so men persecuted the prophets who were before you. You were the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trodden underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In a similar way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. This was one of the first passages of scripture that I memorized, specifically "You are the light of the world." And in this sermon, I mean, you can go in and it has stuff on chastity, on anger, on forgiveness, on not being anxious, everything that I needed when I was just being formed, and everything that I still continue to need in my life as I go on this journey with Christ and this great adventure that is my life with Him. But this, I think, is the theme of my life and what I want to be the theme of the podcast. And not just this podcast, but the everything I do, is that you are the light of the world. So I want to turn this back to you, that you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. That means that something that is powerful, something that God has raised up, you can't hide it. God did not light the lamp just to hide you under a basket, but rather He wants to put you on a stand so you give light to the people in the house. And when we start to understand how profound that is, when we start to understand that we live in this dark world and God wants to use us to provide light to people who are struggling and wandering and hurting themselves and hurting others in the darkness, I think we understand the responsibility we have to pursue holiness, to pursue God, to pray, to go to confession, to frequent the sacraments, to evangelize, and to truly become the best versions of ourselves. Because when we're excellent, when we're fulfilling our potential, that's when we're going to be most effective as evangelists. That's when we're going to be most effective as tools in the hands of the Lord, in the hand of the Lord. And so I really encourage you in that. Hopefully there's something in my story that resonated with you that you can relate to. Hopefully there was some nugget of wisdom here in this, and just the things that I've learned over the years that have helped you. But this is what I want to continue to do at Seeking Excellence. So I kind of see this, doing my story again. Like I said at the beginning, I did this on like episode 3. And so it's awesome now to be able to do it again. And I kind of see this as a season of a fresh start. We have new people on the team helping to edit my writing, helping to edit the audio, helping to edit video. And so we're really, I'm excited that this is going to be on YouTube for people to be able to see and watch this video. But this is kind of a new season of Seeking Excellence. So if you believe in what we're doing here, as I already mentioned, if you join us on Locals, the supporters are great because they help me to pay the people who are helping to get this message out there, to share my story, to share the things that I continue to learn, that I've already learned by the grace of God. And so thank you for listening today. I hope that this blessed you, and know that I'm praying for you, and be your best. God bless you.